Well, good morning. It really is great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be back at Moody Church. I've been here a few times before and got to know a few of you, and also lovely to be with the C.S. Lewis Institute. I'm a real fan of C.S. Lewis, but I'm even more a fan of Jesus Christ. And my hope is that today, you may already be fans, but you will be even more fans, that you will go away just with a sense of worship at how amazing Jesus is, demonstrably through his teaching. So what we're going to do in the first session is we're going to look at some of Jesus's memes, briefly, things that he's said that have really taken off and become very popular. We're going to look at his memory techniques, and then we're going to look at his shortest and longest stories. And the longest story is the parable of the two sons in Luke 15. We're going to go more into that in the second session. Then we're going to look at some other stories, and then we're going to look at the question of, was Jesus the genius, or is it possible that someone else made up these things and attributed them to Jesus? So we're going to look at that skeptical argument towards the end. So let's start with Jesus' memes, and I want to show you three remarkable people, one of whom Mahatma Gandhi, who wrote about the saying of Jesus, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. People are trying to trick Jesus, and they've got either you should pay taxes to the Romans, then you're a sellout to the Romans. That's the idea. Or you deny that you should pay taxes to the Romans, and then you're a revolutionary and you should be arrested. So how can Jesus possibly respond to this? And of course, he asks to be shown a coin, and he says, whose inscription is on this? And they say, Caesar's. And so he says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. But there's a deeper level at this, because if Caesar's head is on the coin, if his image is on the coin, whose image is on humans? God's image is on humans. Render to God the things that are God's, you give everything. And people have marveled at this, and here is Mahatma Gandhi marveling at this amazing saying, and that's just one thing attributed to Jesus. Here's another one. Remarkably successful man, most powerful man in the planet at one stage, Barack Obama, summarizing his ethic: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat the people in the way you want to be treated, and if you're not doing that, and if society is not respecting that basic principle, then we're going backwards instead of going forwards. Now, that's great. Where's he getting that from? Of course he's getting that from Jesus. To do unto others what you'd have them do to you is called the golden rule. The first person to articulate the positive golden rule in history, as far as we can tell, searching around literature, is Jesus. That's genius, to come up with something that people, it just affects society so much, it's such a great rule. A different character, but again, someone very successful, Elon Musk. The limbic instinct for vengeance is incredibly strong. That's why turn the other cheek is such a powerful idea. Now, I have no idea whether Mr. Musk knows where that idea comes from. But we know that idea comes straight from Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ has loads of brilliant ideas that some of the most successful and influential people on the planet are finding that's amazing. But it's not just that they're getting one from one philosopher and another from another philosopher. It's the fact that Jesus Christ came up with them all, and there's quite a few I haven't even talked about, like judge not that you be not judged, and so on. Jesus holds the records on meme creation, but not just things that people say that go viral, but really helpful things, really amazing things, really profound, insightful things that cut to the core of human character. But I'm not going to spend most of my time looking at Jesus' genius in his sayings. I want to look at it in his stories. But first I want to start with him as a teacher and how Jesus helps people. We're all weak in different ways. I've got an appalling sense of direction. I came bottom in my school art exam. I say these things because the problem is sometimes when people say my bio, they think, oh, wow, that guy must be able to do lots and lots of things. Well, God allows you sometimes to do more in one area, but sometimes there's a bit of a catch and you're not so good in some other things. But one thing that Jesus does is he takes people where they are and he teaches them and he helps them. And Jesus knows that we forget. And so what's he do when he knows that people forget? Well, he helps people learn. Now, some of what I'm saying is actually not in the book that's coming out, but it's in our magazine. I'd love you all to sign up to our free magazine, tyndalehouse.com/magazine, and you can find this. And one of the things I argue is that Jesus sometimes taught in Greek. And that's going to be important. We're going to look at that just a moment. What languages did Jesus speak when he's here on earth? Now, of course, he's the Word of God. He knows every language. But we also read in Luke's Gospel twice that he grew in wisdom, which is like, how's that happen? Well, it's amazing, isn't it? It's there in Scripture, and so we accept it. That Jesus learned things as a baby. And what we see is that sometimes he speaks Aramaic. You remember how he speaks to that 12-year-old girl in Mark chapter 5 and says, Talitha kum, little girl, get up. Or to the deaf-mute man, he says, Ephatha, be opened, and he's able to speak. He prays Abba, the Aramaic word, to his father, and he speaks Aramaic from the cross, but people there misunderstand him. People have sometimes built off that to think that he taught. His public teaching was always in Aramaic. But of course, the language you speak to a 12-year-old girl or a deaf-mute man who may not have had a lot of education, or your prayer language may not be the same as the language you teach in publicly. And for several centuries, people have been emphasizing that Jesus spoke Aramaic, and I think the Romantic movement had the idea that Jesus spoke only Aramaic. And the reason they like that is they don't want the thought that he's been corrupted by Greek knowledge and learning. Like the idea that Jesus is some sort of primitive human spirit who can articulate from just sheer instinct what is true. And some skeptics today actually like the idea that Jesus spoke only Aramaic because they think that that puts a gap between the things he said and taught and what you've got in the Gospels, which are in Greek. One very influential writer from the 19th century, the most influential writer on Jesus as a scholar, said it's not probable that Jesus knew Greek, that language was very little spread, and so on. But actually, when you look in the Gospels, there's quite a bit of evidence for Jesus speaking Greek. Not just that the Gospels are in Greek, so that the early Christians chose to use a lot of Greek to get the message out, but also, remember how the family had to go down to Egypt for a little time. Well, if Joseph was going to start doing business there, even if he's there for a short time, he probably needs to interact with people in Greek. The fact that Jesus was an itinerant preacher, he travelled round. Again, you have to speak whatever language the people you're speaking to use. Two of his disciples, Andrew and Philip, have specifically Greek names. And some of the people he comes across have Greek names. Nicodemus, a nice Greek name. Timaeus, I love that. Bartimaeus, remember Bartimaeus? Bar, B-A-R, is Aramaic for son of. So Bartimaeus is son of Timaeus. But Timaeus is the name of one of Plato's philosophical dialogues. So I imagine that Bartimaeus' grandfather may well have liked Plato, and so he called his son Timaeus. But then there's Aramaic and Greek in the family, and so their son is Bartimaeus. The great Jewish assembly, the top assembly in the land, is called the Sanhedrin. Do you know the word Sanhedrin? It comes from Greek, Sanhedrion. It's a Greek word. The top Jewish assembly is called a Greek word because after Alexander the Great, Greek spread a lot. Herod's called Herod, relating to hero, because it's a Greek word. Greek spread everywhere. And if you want to get on in life, that's the language of business in the Eastern Empire. And in fact, Jesus sometimes used specifically Greek words, like the word hypocrite. Hypocrite's a Greek word. Now, he grew up in Nazareth, which is less than 4 miles from Sepphoris, where they had a theatre. What's a hypocrite? A hypocrite is an actor. Someone who and the actors in those days used to put a face mask on, not our sort of face mask, but, one that covers the entire face so it wouldn't show you who they were. And the thing about it is, people say, well, couldn't there have been an Aramaic word for actor? But don't forget, theatre was something that started with the Greeks. Then the Romans took it on. So when you're using that, you're fundamentally talking about something the Greeks have. Actors. Hebrews don't have actors. There's no theatre in the Old Testament. And Jesus, 3 times in different sayings, talks about Hades. Or he sends the Paraclete, comforter. Those are Greek words. There's even a time in John's Gospel where the crowd say, is he going to go to the Greek diaspora where different Greeks are and teach the Greeks? Well, how could he do that if he wasn't known to know Greek? I want to look at his Sermon on the Mount, which really is a lesson on the Mount. It's a précis, a summary of probably a whole day's teaching, where I imagine he taught people back and forth. Now you guys are going to memorize the Beatitudes. And you look at where people came from, and it says they came from Galilee, the Decapolis, which are the 10 Greek-speaking cities, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. Now, when you've got a group of people, some of whom know Aramaic and some of whom know Greek at the time, which language are you going to speak? The answer is you're going to speak Greek. Now, I think what will happen in all sorts of contexts is usually one language has the upper hand. So I know in Europe, if a group of British businessmen and German business folk get together and they have a meeting, almost certainly the conversation is going to be in English. It's just the way it is. And so either this lesson would have been given in Greek, or it's given in more than one language. That can happen as well. We don't know. But what that means is I do think we've got Jesus' exact words. And that's really exciting in the Gospels. Now let's look at them. Here we've got the Beatitudes in Greek. Now, you don't need me to give them in English because I'm sure a lot of you have learnt them. This is Matthew 5, verse 3, the top one. It says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Now, I want you to notice the 2 nice bright green signs there. The first one is the word for poor, beginning with the letter pi. And the next one is the word spirit, beginning with the letter pi. They both begin with the letter P, okay? This, by the way, shows you alliteration is biblical, right? So, if your pastor uses alliteration, good on him. What's the next one? The next one is, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. The word mourn begins with the letter pi, and so does the word comforted. And then blessed are the meek, begins with a P. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, begins with a P. So it begins with the first 4. Now, you can overdo alliteration. Jesus doesn't overdo alliteration. He doesn't alliterate them all. But he helps your memory by starting off with a bit of a bang with one letter. Then we get to verse 6, and it's blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Now, look at the word thirst. That's the left-hand one in yellow. It begins with a delta iota, a di, and the word righteousness begins di. Okay? So you've got some alliteration there. Go down to verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart. Greek is easy, isn't it? You can see the word pure begins K-A. Like my wife is called Catherine. Pure. She is. And there are all sorts of words like cathartic, which are about cleansing. And what's the word heart? Well, cardiology, isn't it? Pure in heart. K-A-K-A. So Jesus is using alliteration, not overdoing it, but just making it so that it's easier for us to remember. Verse 10, blessed are those who are, persecuted for righteousness. And the word persecute has got 2 D's to begin with. There's something about Greek grammar that someone can explain to you. But look at the 3rd and 4th letters. That's the real stem of the verb, the di, the 3rd and 4th letters on the left-hand one in yellow in verse 10. And that's the same di you get on the word righteousness. But there's a bit more. Of course, verse 7 is, blessed are the merciful, they will obtain mercy. And the great thing is, they get exactly the same root again and again. So it's the same sound there because it's the same thing when it comes to mercy. Exact equivalence. Show mercy and you get shown mercy. Then there's one in verse 9, a bit more complicated to explain. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. But there really is a sound identity between those things shown in blue. And of these, a lot of them end with the same 5 letters, and actually 4 of them end with the same 8 letters. So there's lots of things to help the memory there. But it's not just that he begins that way. As this message goes on, he's got other alliteration. So you're seeing in yellow, you're seeing alliteration based on the letter K. In green, alliteration based on the letter L. Kappa and lambda, if you prefer, in Greek. Again, not overdoing it, not just making you fed up of one letter, not so using one letter that you're losing the message, just the right amount. But he also wants to engage the audience. And so you remember this saying in Matthew 5:22. Whoever says to his brother Raka, which is the Aramaic word for fool, will be liable to the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin is a Greek word. And then whoever says fool using the Greek word, from which we get the word moron, okay, will be liable to Gehenna. Now notice what he's done. He's used an Aramaic word, then a Greek word, then a Greek word, then an Aramaic word. And that's a really good way to make sure that if your audience, they're coming from different places, they're all staying engaged. And it's an amazing way that he speaks. No man, no one can serve 2 masters. The word can and to and serve, all beginning with the letter D. Matthew 7, still going in the same thing. Beware, using the word PRO, to beware of false prophets, PRO. They come to you in the sheep's clothing, and sheep begin PRO. So it's a very profound thing. It's brilliant because, of course, we all know the story of Red Riding Hood, don't we? I mean, as in the idea of wolves dressing up is something that goes back a very long way. It really gripped you. And Jesus uses this and very powerfully. Of course, Little Red Riding Hood came a long time after Jesus, you understand. But I'm saying Jesus is using memorable things at the same time as things that really speak so deeply. The very next verse after this, he's saying, are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? All of those are the letter S. Again, you're finding this throughout the sermon. Look at this one. What I've given you there is you can actually see the yellow corresponds with the yellow in the Greek, the green with the green, and the blue with the blue. And what Jesus is doing in that thing is constantly having 2 words next to each other with the same letter. And it's just a very, very powerful thing, because I imagine if many of you have been Christians for a lot of years, you've never actually sat down to memorize the Sermon on the Mount, right? But actually, if someone were to start off one of those sentences, a lot of the time you'd be able to finish it, right? Because Jesus has built these things, not just in Greek, but elsewhere, so that they're really memorable. And it's not just that happens in Matthew, it also happens in Luke. When Luke gives the Beatitudes, he doesn't just have, and this is a same but different talk by Jesus. I repeat talks and switch them around, slightly change them. It begins with 4 blesseds and then 4 woes. And you've got these P's running right the way throughout. Same talk, you've got the letter A, alpha, running throughout a whole section. Give to the one who asks you, and the one who takes away what are yours, don't ask for them back, and so on. And you just find that letter alpha is used in 22% of all of these 110 words in a row. It's amazing. Again, you'll get the slides because you will get sent out the video. So you don't need to memorize this, which is why I'm going through faster than you could possibly take this in. Okay? That's fine. I know that. It's okay. By the way, you know C.S. Lewis banned people from taking notes in his lectures? Did you know that? Yeah? You know, really? He wouldn't let people take notes. They had to listen. Now, sometimes people taking notes can help. You learn the way you learn. You do you, okay? Yeah, that's fine.
Why was that? Why was that, Vera? Did he explain why he did that?
He would really perform. In my church, I've got a lady who was taught by Tolkien and Lewis. And she's still alive, and you can talk to her about it. Tolkien, like, completely boring, and just going on, like, describing one more tree, and like the way he did. But Lewis, really exciting, keep it short, and he wanted you to engage with what was being said right then. I mean, he thought about every word. But anyway, here's another bit. Luke chapter 6, judge not that you, and you not be judged, condemn not and you will not be condemned. And notice the word judge, K-R-I, is in yellow, that's left-hand word, and the next one, and then the word condemn, they all begin with a letter K. And then you have things that are pressed down and shaken together. Now, that's in green. And what hopefully you can see is that they both have the same last 5 letters, and they both repeat their first and third letters. There's a lot of similarity there. Or when he talks about the measure you use, he's putting 2 similar beginning words, identical beginning words next door to each other, and so on. About the blind man, likewise. This sort of alliteration happens in Mark. Jesus calls people to become fishers of men, and the word fisher and the word men has the same beginning. Or he says those who are well don't need a doctor, and the word well and the word doctor, like we become from like psychiatrist, that's where the iatr bit is about doctor. They don't need a doctor, and the 2 words occur next door to each other. Or he says can the sons of the bride chamber fast, and the word bride chamber and fast begin with the same letter, while the bridegroom, same letter, begins. Whatever measure you use will be measured back on you. Look at that. M-E-T-R, 3 words in a row, and so on. Jesus says about his death, he says the Son of Man is going to be rejected with an alpha, and killed with an alpha, and rise again with an alpha. If anyone wants to follow me, alpha, let him deny himself, alpha, take up his cross, alpha, and follow me, alpha. What does it profit a man, kappa, if he gains the whole world? Kappa. What can a man give in return for his soul? And man and return both with alpha. I've looked at that, sorry. They will mock the Son of Man and spit on him, E-M-P, in both of those. The Son of Man didn't come to be served, delta, but to serve, delta, and to give, delta, his life, a ransom for many. You're seeing how time and time again some of his best known sayings have got this in. Oh, what about the scribes? They love greetings, alpha, in the marketplace, alpha. Or for a pretense, P-R-O, they make long prayers. Now that's interesting because that even works in English, pretense and prayers. Sometimes they do translate, sometimes they don't. It's not just that he does that. Jesus also repeats himself. Now, why should good teachers repeat? Because people forget. Everyone forgets. And one of the things that's interesting is sometimes when people examine the Gospels, they do it in a skeptical way. And they think that one Gospel writer has maybe got a better report than another, and another one's like changed it. Because when they look at this saying here and that saying there, they say, how can they be slightly different? One must be true and the other must be false. But of course, if Jesus repeats himself, then he can say the same thing with slight variations. So in Matthew 5 and 19, he's got his sayings about adultery. In Matthew 5 and 18, he's got his sayings about if your eye offends you, pluck it out. And same about hands. Or good trees bearing good fruits, and that's how you know them. That's in chapter 7 and chapter 12. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Comes up twice. You'll be hated for my name's sake. Comes up twice. That's just in Matthew. So Matthew is telling you Jesus repeats himself. Look at all these ones. We're not going to go through them all. They'll be on the video, okay? Lots and lots of times that Jesus repeats himself in Matthew. The same thing said more than once, right? Okay, here's some more. All in Matthew. Jesus repeats himself a lot. Weeping and gnashing of teeth, 6 different occasions. Get behind me, Satan, he says more than once. Everyone who has, it will be given and will have in abundance. He says more than once. The passion predictions, 3 times. What about Mark? Whoever will be first needs to be last or servant. That comes up in chapter 9 and chapter 10. The one who has people having ears and not listening in chapter 4 and chapter 8. Who has ears to hear, let him hear, comes up twice. And he predicts his passion more than once. So Matthew tells you Jesus repeats. Mark tells you Jesus repeats. Luke tells you the same. Your faith has saved you. He says on 4 different occasions. Show yourselves to the priest. He says twice. No one lights a lamp in certain circumstances. Chapter 8 and chapter 11. People who love the first seats. Chapter 11, chapter 20. Don't worry what you'll say. Chapter 12 and 21. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Twice. Everyone has more will be given. Predicts his passion more than once. Okay? And in John, truly, truly, I say to you, 25 times. Right? I'm going to the Father. Look at all those times he says, I'm going to the Father. I am the bread of life. Now, think about this. He has the I am sayings, even some of them, more than once. I am the light of the world, more than once. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I'm the true vine, and I'm the vine. Now, I want you to look at that one for a moment. John's gospel has, I am the true vine, and I am the vine. Now, imagine if you had one gospel that said, Jesus said, I am the true vine, and another gospel that said, I am the vine. People would say, well, one of them has added. You know, because in Matthew's gospel, Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit. And in Luke, he said, blessed are the poor. Well, which did he say? Blessed are the poor in spirit or blessed are the poor? That's just because it's in different gospels that people do that. But in the same gospel, Jesus can say, I am the vine and I am the true vine. You see, because he comes back to the same thing again and again. He says it's like variations. And what goes wrong is people often, rather than looking at the Gospels like this, looking at the 4 Gospels, they go too quickly to the comparison across the Gospels. And they assume that the way we've got Jesus' teaching is just through some narrow thread, that somehow it just managed to make it from Jesus into a writing about Jesus, and that we got it. Not that. Jesus is going around repeating the sermon again and again. His disciples are hearing the same sermon again and again. He's telling some of the same stories again and again. And so how is it that they can correctly memorize his stories? Well, my brother used to be an assistant to a comedian, and he went round listening to his show again and again, and he said, I could have done the whole thing. You know, by the time you've done that. So, in fact, you don't come up with a story like the prodigal son or something like the Beatitudes and only use them once. So what we've got in the Gospels has come to us through a thick wave of tradition because Jesus had 12 disciples. And even though one of them fell away, they then replaced him with another one. So in fact, because there were more than just the 11 who had been there from the beginning. You remember how they chose in Acts chapter 1, they had a choice of which guy should get replaced into the 12, because they actually have a number more disciples who've been around there memorizing thing right the way through. The test is you have to have been there taking the lessons, taking the courses from the beginning. Oh, we've actually got more than one candidate. So, I am the resurrection and the life, and I am the way, the truth, and life. He's saying I'm the life, 2 different ways. Now let's get on to 2 of Jesus' stories. Let's start with the shortest of Jesus' parables, which is simply 19 words in Matthew and 15 in Luke. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till all was leavened. Bang. Love it. Just so profound. Because he uses this word measure. And the word measure is a particular word. It's the Greek word sarton, which is comes from the Hebrew word seah, S-E-A-H. Okay? And that's an Old Testament word. Now, you know how measures differ from country to country. So in your country, you use Fahrenheit for temperature. You come over to Europe, we're all using Celsius, okay? It's the same with dry measures, liquid measures. You go around the ancient world, one country's got one way of measuring things, another's got another way of measuring things. So, Josephus, the Jewish historian, has to explain to people what this measure is. Because people in Italy were using the modius for dry stuff. People in Egypt were using the artaba, and people in Israel, Palestine, and I'm not using those terms, politically, that place, were using the seer. So in other words, that shows us the land that this saying comes from. You don't come up with this saying if you're in any other country, right? So the kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman hid in 3 measures of flour. But there's more than just it uses the right local measure. It's 3 seers of flour. Now that word comes up in the Old Testament a few different times. I've given you all of the times it occurs, and you notice the word 3 only occurs in one occasion. And that is a one occasion when it goes with flour. There is other time it goes with parched grain, 2 seers of seed, there's a seer of fine flour, 1 seer. But what's interesting is this particular time you've got the same substance as the Old Testament and the same number. And I want to argue that Jesus often uses numbers from the Old Testament in his stories. But I want you to notice one more thing. Look at that passage in Genesis 18 verse 6. Abraham went quickly to the tent to Sarah and said, quick, 3 seers of flour. No verb, just quick. He's barking this, right? Quick, 3 seers of flour, need it to make cakes. Now, what's so interesting about that is it's a woman putting the 3 seers of flour there. And if you think about the first time that seers are mentioned in the Bible, that's it, with the number 3, with a woman, and think of all the fruit that came from that occasion. Genesis chapter 18 is the first proper entertainment in the Bible. I mean, obviously there are provisions in Genesis 14, well, Melchizedek brings out provisions, but the first actual meal are when 3 visitors come to Abraham, 3 visitors, and he kills the calf, which would give you 400 portions of meat. Yeah? So 3 visitors, strangers, come to Abraham, and Abraham entertains them really well. Now, one of those visitors was God, and God's no man's debtor. So God makes Abraham in charge of the heavenly feast. You see? He entertained angels unawares, as it says in the book of Hebrews. So what's incredible is it's not just that Jesus is using a particular local measure. He's referring to the Old Testament, but you can also think of all of the fruit that came from Sarah's first recorded cooking. It's amazing, isn't it? To think of all of the descendants that that barren woman has had spiritually since then. And that's what the kingdom of heaven is like. That is the brilliance to fit so much in such a short space. Let's look at Jesus' longest parable. That's the parable of the 2 sons, 388 words long. So we'll start off having a look. Let's start with the audience. The audience is 2 groups of 2. Now, tax collectors and sinners, it says in Luke chapter 15, were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So grumbling is, of course, what Israel does in the desert, and drawing near is a good thing. But if you like, the bad people, the tax collectors and sinners, are doing the good thing, and the supposedly good people are doing the bad thing. 2 groups of 2. We've got tax collectors and sinners. Well, tax collectors are people who take your money, and they're collaborating with the Romans. So that's not very good. And sinners, well, we're all sinners, but these are like sinners. Well, I don't need to explain about that really, do I? Okay. Pharisees, they're people who want to separate from sin. They're the good guys. They live righteous lives. And scribes, they copy out the Bible. I mean, they might also write contracts for you occasionally, but what they spend a lot of their time doing is writing out the Bible, particularly the first 5 books of the Bible, the law. They really know that stuff super well. They count and they distinguish similar phrases. Now, if ever there was a mixed ability audience, it was this. Jesus has got people who, my guess is that sinners, don't take that much interest in the Bible. Okay, and tax collectors, they're more interested in things other than the Bible, like collecting your money. So there's one lot of people we don't expect to know the Bible particularly well. And there's another lot we expect to be knowing the Bible really, really well. And Jesus is able to teach both groups simultaneously. Because he's able to tell a story, the story of the 2 sons, which will work, of the prodigal son, works absolutely perfectly if you've got no background at all, no cultural background. It just works as a story. You can take that story from culture to culture and people get it. But he actually begins with 3 stories. If you like, 2 of them are a warm-up act. They're really good. There's one about the sheep. A shepherd who's got 100 sheep. One of them goes astray, And he finds it and he rejoices. What's so interesting is this is 1 out of 100 that gets lost by going away. Then he tells a story of a lost coin, and it's 1 out of 10 that's lost not by going away, it's lost in the house. And the woman searches. Then he's going to tell a story of 2 sons, one who's lost going away and the other who stayed at home. The one who went away was lost, and implicitly it's telling you the one who stayed at home was lost. Right? Now, what's so powerful about this is if you're a tax collector, you might be able to do some mathematics. You go from 1% to 10%, what's the next percent you might expect? I mean, there's more than one way of filling that in. I know you can't make a reliable graph with just 2 points. I get that. But you might well think 1%, 10%, 100%. So it's telling you they're both lost. And also, as we go in, we can see so much of the way those 2 stories help build you to read the next one. So anyway, the third story begins, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of property that's coming to me," and he divided his property between them. Them. Notice that. Them. That is one of the most important words in the entire parable that people so often miss. This is a fair father who makes sure he doesn't just give stuff to one son, he gives to both. So big brother should be so grateful that he's getting his inheritance early. Little brother has done the dirty work, asking his dad the awkward question, and he should say, "Wow, little brother, I love you. I love you so much. That's so kind of you to ask for us both to get our inheritance early. If ever you need anything, I'm right there for you." Of course, that's not quite how he does respond. Now, the legal side is it's a story, so we don't know what country it takes place in. But if you imagine it takes place in Israel, then an older brother gets double. And in many places where you've got cultures with a farm, you don't just split the farm into ever smaller portions as you go through inheritance. So that means probably the younger brother goes off with movable property while the older brother gets to keep the whole farm. So, I mean, whatever way, and it's a story, you think this older brother has done so well. He now owns the farm. Now, it's not just that Jesus tells that story. That's Luke chapter 15. Look at the very first verse of the next chapter, because this is a story where the younger son goes off and wastes his property. But the very first verse of the next chapter is, he also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. So we've got 2 stories next door to each other about wasters told to Pharisees who really don't like seeing waste of money. Quite a powerful thing. But as he tells this story, you remember how the younger son ends up feeding pigs. Now that's a powerful thing, because if you're a Pharisee, you're absolutely on side at that point, because Jesus has told a story where this guy is getting what he deserves. This story is going so well because this person who disrespected his father is now feeding pigs, and so they're really on side before it's going to turn around and hit them as a story. But why does he end up feeding pigs? Look carefully at Jesus' story. "And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need." So why is he in need? Is it, 1, because he wasted his money, his own fault? Or is it 2, because he happened to have had the bad luck to choose the land where there was going to be a famine? Now, a lot of people, when they hear this story, forget about the fact that Jesus has a famine in this story. They just notice about the son wasting everything. They don't notice that he happened to be the unlucky one who chose the one country where there happened to be a famine. Now, when the older brother is looking back, he says, your son who's wasted his livelihood with prostitutes. That's the only way he sees it, is in terms of blaming the younger brother. But this is a really, really profound bit of balance in Jesus' story. Because often what we tend to do is we tend to say they're in that mess because of their own fault. And you know what? That's true, but it's partly true. Actually, it's a combination of their own fault and some pretty bad luck. That's often what it is. And, I'm using bad luck in a non-technical sense, okay? I'm not denying God's sovereignty when I say bad luck. You understand? Okay. And this is just a brilliant balance you get in Jesus' story. The psychological perception here. Because very easily we miss this sort of stuff. All the little detail in the story that when he's spent everything, it says he went and hired himself out. He got no pay for this. To one of the citizens of that country. Ooh, that is a painful word, isn't it? The citizen, because it implies, of course, he's a non-citizen. That whole sense of alienation is there. Or when it says they got back and it says they began to celebrate, which just tells you this is a thing that goes on for a long time. So what you can see is this parable does a lot with a few words, and that is a really clever thing that Jesus does. Or when he says the older brother was in the field, he doesn't tell you what he was doing in the field. But what was he doing in the field? Well, it seems he was working late when everyone else was already home from work. He's already working. He's still working. So Jesus, very powerful in his word choice. But he also can do that by words that are omitted. What's the first word from the older brother to his father? Look, these many years I've served you, I've slaved for you, and I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. What's amazing here is the missing word. Can you see the missing word? Every time in the story the younger brother has addressed his father, his first word has been Father. That's when he talks to him at the beginning, when he rehearses his speech in his head, and when he actually talks to him. All three times it's Father. See the missing word? That is amazing. That's the genius of a story like this. Look, I've been slaving for you. No, you've not. You've been building up your own business, your own farm. You're not a slave. You're thinking of yourself as a slave. You're thinking of yourself in that slave-master relationship. But you're a son. You're the heir. But he's denying his father. And then he says, you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. I'm here on the farm being vegetarian the whole time. No, you're not. That's not plausible. Simply not plausible that he's never eaten meat in all of these years, right? So what's the problem? You never gave me a young goat. Well, firstly, you already own all of the goats. So you never gave me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. What? Is there a ban on having friends round to the farm that you own? That doesn't work either. So what's here? Again, it's what's missing. So that I might celebrate with my friends. That celebration is not a real celebration if Dad is still there. It's not who he wants there, it's who he doesn't want there. That's so powerful. So this son is physically close and yet so far away in his heart. And that's the brilliance of this story. And then, what have we got at the end? We got the missing ending. Because the father comes out to him and says, child, you're always with me, all that's mine is yours, which is absolutely literally true. But we had to celebrate because your brother was dead and is alive again, was lost and is found. And then the story ends. And you don't know how the older brother responds. And that's a powerful thing, because that makes it an invitation. If you find yourself in that position of being that older brother, you're invited to respond. Now, you know Sudoku. Sudoku is how you fill in the bits that are missing with the bits you have. We can do Sudoku with this parable, because when the sheep that went away and was found, they celebrated. When the coin that was lost at home was found, they celebrated. Therefore, if this brother were to respond, there would be celebration. You see? So we can actually fill in the ending based on the warm-up bits of the story. That is the amazing way Jesus tells the story. Now, there's more to it, because remember, he's got these Bible experts in the crowd. So, it actually refers a lot to the Old Testament. There's a lot in this story that is like the story of Jacob and Esau. when it says a man had two sons, if you're a scribe, a Bible expert, who's the most famous person in the Bible to have two and only two sons? Well, the most famous person to have two and only two sons is Isaac, because Abraham had two sons, then he had some more. Isaac had two sons. Abraham had two sons, then he had some more. But Isaac had two sons. Full stop. Period. Sorry, I'm speaking British English. Forget that. Okay. So there was a man who had two sons. That looked like Isaac. But then also this. Esau, the older brother, is cheated out of his inheritance by the younger brother. So Esau had an awful lot to be angry about, didn't he? Older brother, and in fact he was angry. He was so furious that his younger brother had to go off into a far country where he looked after animals. But there's a difference, because that younger brother went off with nothing and came back with an awful lot. Whereas with this story, in Jesus' story, he goes off with an awful lot and comes back with nothing. But it's a bit more, because we know in the story of Jacob and Esau that Esau is the man who's out in the field all the time. Then we have that phrase that the younger brother uses in Jesus' story. You remember that? He says, "Here I am, dying of hunger." Where in the Old Testament has someone said, "Here I am, dying of hunger"? That would be when Esau came in from the field and Jacob had made some soup, some lentil soup, and he's saying, "Here I am, dying of hunger. I'm going to give up my inheritance, my birthright for that." Now, if you're a scribe, Jesus is showing he knows a thing or two. He knows about these texts that you spend your time copying, and there's some quite profound lessons there, and this is one of them. What's the dramatic high point of the story? The dramatic high point you would make into the film, the high point, the music would go so high on this, is when the father runs, embraces and kisses the younger son. And there's only one text in the entire Old Testament where someone runs, embraces and kisses anyone, and that is when Esau runs, embraces and kisses Jacob, who cheated him out of everything. And it's the most surprising reaction in the entire Bible, because Esau's coming towards Jacob with 400 armed men, and Jacob is petrified, and he is spending the whole of the previous chapter on the contingency plans for what to do with his family, splitting up, trying to minimize the risk. And it's not the response you're expecting. You really are not expecting. It's the most surprising response, I think, in the narrative in the entire Old Testament, is that Esau runs, embraces, and kisses his brother who's cheated out of everything. So there's a challenge there, isn't it? Isn't there? Because, you see, Esau's a bad guy. Even the bad guy who had lost everything ran, embraced, and kissed his younger brother. So the father in Jesus' story is not just a picture of God, he's also a challenge to us, a challenge of how we should behave. Now there's even more, because that verse was actually a special point on the training of the scribes of Jesus' day. Here are two Hebrew manuscripts where you can see the arrow. Just to the left of that, you can see a word. It's on the left-hand word, and it's probably clearer on the right-hand picture. You can see 6 dots over those words. That word, right? That's the word, "and he kissed him," from Genesis 33, verse 4. Those were dots that scribes were obliged to put on this word. And there are only 15 of these sets of dots they need to know in the whole Bible. And this is one of those special dots that's part of their training that was going on in the time of Jesus. So, Jesus makes the dramatic high point of his story a point that's in the scribes' special training. Wow, that's quite a powerful thing. And he draws from that a lesson for them. So there are so many connections here. A man has 2 sons, the older brother coming in from the field, someone saying they're dying of hunger, cheating out of inheritance, young goats. Where's the only other time in the Bible when people eat young goats? That would be when Rebekah prepared the goats for Jacob to use to trick his father Isaac. And what's the younger son given in Jesus' story? Bring out the best robes. You remember how Jacob wore Esau's, not clothes, his robes, when he went in to his brother. And then we see how in the story in Luke 15, it says that the older brother drew near to the house. If you're a scribe, you know that the place that you come across the phrase draw near most in the entire Bible is when, again and again, it's talking about Jacob drawing near to his father Isaac, by the way, who's craving for meat. That's what Isaac's craving for, just like apparently this older brother in Jesus' story. And by the way, Isaac who can't see far off, the father who can't see. So all of these ways in which some of these bits of the stories are even turned over, it's amazing. But we're going to see some more. Because Esau, we know, was waiting for his father to die. And yet he later forgave his brother who had cheated him out of everything. So there's a real lesson there. Even that bad guy forgave. And what the Pharisees and the scribes have got to learn is it's okay for that tax collector who actually cheated you as a Pharisee who likes your money, who cheated you and has been working with the Romans all this time, it's okay for them to get access to God. Right? You could resent that. You've been doing your hard Pharisaic work. You've been following the rules. These guys have been, doing all sorts of stuff, sleeping around, cheating, the rest. And you say, I don't want them fast-tracked into the kingdom. I don't want them accepted with God. And Jesus says, they can be accepted. And that is very upsetting, as well as wonderful news for every sinner. Well, I think we'll end there. Is it questions now or break? Break. Okay, so ignore that it says questions. Break.